Life doesn't move in straight lines. It twists, turns, and surprises us along the way. On Better Things Ahead, we talk with people who have walked those winding paths. Each story reminds us of the lessons, hope, and promise of better things ahead.
Welcome in, and this week we're going to continue kind of walking through our New Year's series. And this week we want to kind of think through the idea of missions, and specifically serving others and serving our community locally, nationally, or internationally, and what that looks like as part of our journey and our growth in Christ, and just in general serving those around us. So this week I'm joined with a couple of special guests who've recently went on a kind of mission trip journey that we want to talk about. So joining with me this week is our student pastor, Jeremy Knowles. Great to have you.
Yep, great to be here.
And one of our longtime members of Ridgecrest, Marilyn Eubank, and so grateful for you to be here as well.
I'm excited to be here.
And so, first, I guess, just to kind of introduce a little bit, I'll let each of you share, and you can, doesn't necessarily matter who goes first or anything, but kind of I'll let you share just a little bit about your background, where, kind of what brought you to Ridgecrest, and, how you're plugged in here, and then also maybe share about some mission trip type experiences that you've had in the past.
Okay. Well, I've actually been here close to 30 years. I got started, Karen Line, Hart and Karen, of course. Karen was the one that got me started, and she went on a mission trip. And of course, I was the one who took her to the bus and picked her up and all that. And the first thing she said when she got off the bus is, "You have to go next year." And that's what got me started. My very first one was to an Indian reservation in Montana, and I have gone at least one mission trip a year ever since then. And some of them places like, out of the country. We've been to Israel, we've been to Guatemala to do water lines, but then there have been a lot of them in the States.
Yeah.
And my primary thing that I've always done is with construction, helping rebuild churches, or, like we worked on the houses after Katrina, and so that's primarily what I have focused on.
Yeah, that's great. And
Yeah.
do you remember what year, by chance, that first one that you went on was?
Somewhere around 2000, maybe. I don't know exactly, but somewhere in that general area.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Very good. All right, Jeremy, how about you?
Yeah. So I've been at Ridgecrest a very short time, not near as long as Miss Marilyn, around 7 months or so as student pastor. And so honored, of course, to be here, and excited for our students to start considering international missions and things like that. And so this was only my second international mission trip. So we went to Mexico when we were in college, Deanna and I. But this is the second international trip I've gone on. Done several local missions in United States and things like that. But yeah, it was an incredible opportunity. And so the mission trips that I've gone on have been very relational in nature. So in Mexico, we partnered with the church to help them with a vacation Bible school and some things like that, getting to know folks and sharing the gospel and that kind of thing. So and that's the kind of missions that I really enjoy. And so as we talk today through the Syston mission trip, we'll talk some more about that. But that's one of the really beautiful things about this particular trip. So.
Yeah, that's that's good. And I like, both of you kind of shared differing kind of aspects or things that you can do ministry related. One thing that I think, I've seen change. I've been involved in local, national, international missions now, since, I don't know, 25, 30 years now. And I've seen it change, and I can remember early on when I was first kind of introduced to the idea of missions, and we had to be careful with the term mission, right? Because, you have other, groups of faith that they define it a certain way. And then also one thing I learned, I think it was going into, I was partnering with a church in Macedonia and partnering with a missionary there, and we did some ministry. And there we could not use the term mission trip. And the reason was the locals automatically connected the term mission trip to the Mormons. And immediately, so if you said you were there on a mission trip, they immediately thought you were a Mormon, and just because of that. And so those terms mean different things across the world. And so I want us to be careful as we're kind of thinking through some of that. Is missions really is an opportunity for us to partner with other churches, other communities of faith all over the world, again, whether it's locally, nationally, internationally, to advance the gospel, right? That's kind of our, what I would say, working definition of a mission trip is. And that looks different ways, different places. Sometimes it's truly like door-to-door evangelism type things. That works in some communities, doesn't work in other communities. Right. It might be building a well in a third world country. That works in some communities. If we were to go to France and say, hey, we're going to build a well, they're going to look at us like we're crazy, right? And so understanding the cultural context and needs of that community, I think is very, very important. And so, with that mindset, each of you kind of mentioned some things that you have experienced. What have you seen? How has that idea of knowing your community, knowing where you're going to serve, how has that impacted the trip itself? Again, maybe it's international. You said you've been on a couple of international trips. You said you've done a lot of stuff stateside as well. So, everywhere we go is a different culture and community, right? So how have you seen a knowledge and understanding of that culture impact your trips?
It makes a big difference. If you understand more of the people, where you're going. One of my favorite trips was to Harlan, Kentucky, coal mining country. So totally and completely different than what we've always been used to.
Yeah.
I mean, these were people who just lived up in the mountains. They hunted. I mean, that was the way they survived, basically. But they were some of the most God-fearing people that you would ever meet. They were some of the nicest people. But they had an old church, but they had been selling, I think, making lunches like chicken and dumplings to sell to the miners. And this was right before Katrina. And they had saved up over $2,500 to build a new church. And they ended up sending it to South Louisiana to help people from Katrina.
Yeah.
So that's when Brother Joe was here, and he said, okay, these people need help. We've got to go see. And we ended up making several trips up there, completely built a new church.
Yeah.
They fed us. They worked with us. We would sit out with them at night and talk, and it was an awesome trip.
Yeah, that's great.
So
yeah. That's really good. Jeremy, you got anything?
So my experience is much more limited than both of you, but I'll say, even going into Syston, we talked a good bit about because I'd never really flown for 8 hours over to another place, and then of course there were things that culturally are just a little different there. One of the things, just kind of, it's not super spiritual or anything, but one of the things is they have a towel warmer on their wall, and so it was one of those things. I didn't know it was hot whenever I got out of the shower there, and so I backed into that, and so that was a good time, a little warm, and but it's fun. It's things like that, you don't necessarily know. Now on the of course the mission side of things, like we had talked about, there's not a language barrier per se, so that's great. It's a great introductory thing, but you get to see a community that they do church a lot different than we would here. Even down to like facility-wise and church-wise, they're not as concerned as things, being so put together as much as they are a genuine love for the Lord. And so having some prior knowledge of those things before we go was super helpful to think about. But it was really, truly just a neat thing to see a church not be so focused on how things look or how them being perfect as much as, the reason why we worship and the reason why they do things like that.
Yeah. And I think, the reason we have to kind of consider all those things is because the risk is us taking an Americanized culture and then trying to impress it on another culture, right? And I don't believe that is the gospel, nor the New Testament mission that you saw with the New Testament churches and things, take place, right? They would go into these communities and establish in those communities, not try to bring in something Paul writes a lot in Corinthians. It says it doesn't matter whether, if you weren't circumcised before, don't worry about, getting circumcised now, vice versa, and all those kinds of things. And so I think it's just there's such a danger and a risk for cultures and communities to develop a bad taste or frustration or skepticism of, people doing so-called missionary type work, because they don't, you have to be very careful, right? And we as Americans are terrible at that. We had a trip one time. I think actually this one was Macedonia as well. I don't know why all my Macedonian memories are coming back, but had a group there. And before any trip, if I'm leading a trip, one of our key meetings that we do going into that trip is this exact content stuff where we're talking about that culture, saying here's what to expect, here are some things that are different, here are like no-nos whatsoever, you have to really be aware of, because certain things in different cultures mean different things, right? And so we had this meeting, and specifically the Macedonian culture, those who would consider themselves Christian were very traditional, very orthodox kind of, a version of Roman Orthodox kind of belief system, or so you had a little bit of that. Well, one of the things they specifically, missionary had told us about was alcohol, because Southern Baptist tradition, you have a lot of debate within churches and stuff as far as the freedom to drink alcohol or abstaining from alcohol, all those kinds of things, right? And so everybody has a personal opinion on that, which is fine. But that was something that they had previously had a bad experience with, so they kind of warned us, hey, be cautious how you talk through alcohol. And so I had this meeting with our team, explain that to them and said, understand, while you may be for or against it, whatever, be careful how you say that, because they may consider themselves a Christian. They could be a very infant in their belief. They may not be a Christian. Yeah. But if you come in saying, well, I don't drink alcohol because I'm a Christian, you immediately create this barrier, because in European culture, it's very common for everyone to partake. And so you have to be very careful, because now they're all of a sudden, well, what do you mean? I'm a Christian and I drink alcohol. So what's, Right. So sure enough, we had a member said those exact words when we were at like a celebration for these individuals who went through like this English as a second language training program, and we were there at their graduation party, and of course they all had drinks, and they specifically said, hey, let me buy you, I don't know, it was a beer, wine, whatever it was, and then she immediately responded, no, I don't drink because I'm a Christian. Right. And then immediately, how did they respond? Well, I'm a Christian, I'm getting a pint, and so you immediately kind of create this, stuff. And we just have to be careful of going and understanding some of those cultural things. And so I just always want to be very, very mindful of those things. And I think what it does is when you go into with appreciation with a culture, people are going to be more receptive, and anytime I've went internationally, whatever country I've been to, they like to ask a lot of questions, like, what does your culture look like? And you get to share that. But then hopefully we're asking the same question, saying, hey, well, how does your culture say this? I remember with England, whenever I took a couple of students the first time, it was a blast, because it was like the whole week, it was like these students, they were constantly asking, like, well, we call this, what do you call it? And like, it was this constant all week interaction of learning each other's, words for things. And it's fun, right? To be able to embrace a new culture. So, along those lines, let's start kind of, talking through the most recent kind of mission trip type journey you guys went on. We had the opportunity to go to Syston, England, as you mentioned, a small town community in the Midlands of England, just about middle of the country itself. Syston, Leicester would be kind of, the broader or larger city kind of things. And so kind of tell me a little bit about that trip specifically, some things maybe, culture-wise, or some things that you did on this type of trip, and some things that you kind of saw and experienced as part of a willingness to go.
I guess this was kind of different from what I had been used to doing, because I'd always done pretty much the construction, and I'm kind of past that now. Syston was just an absolutely lovely church. Most of the people are old, either my age or older, So for me, it was more chance to just be there and love on them and encourage them. It's a small village, and they almost feel kind of like they're isolated from everybody, you know. But they're super sweet people. They take care of each other, which you don't always see. But like a lot of the older ladies who are either widowed or don't drive, and some of the ones who do, they take care of them. They make sure they get to church. And they do a lot at church. I think when I went last year, they had something at church every night just so they could get together, whether it was a game night or had a night to eat fish and chips, whatever. So, but they're really sweet people. But I enjoyed meeting those other people and it being something, really something almost new to me.
Yeah.
I've never done a lot of just the witnessing and the talking, and that's kind of what I do now. And I've realized, hey, I really enjoy that.
Yeah. Yeah. That's good. Yeah.
Yeah. So along some of the same lines, we're just, I think, well, I talked to my sister-in-law about the Syston trip, and we talked specifically about, the impact that you have on a particular trip. And she said, well, if you've encouraged a community of believers, then you've been a missionary. And so one of the really cool things about Syston is in particular about their church. Excuse me, is we got a chance to just get to know the people and to encourage them and to spur them on, because they're lay led. And so, even Pastor Anthony over there is a layman, and he loves the Lord and serves in a huge capacity, and so even still, I've tried to maintain a relationship with them. In particular, he and Ben and Rebecca, a family that I got a chance to stay with. They're probably maybe the youngest couple in the church as far as that goes, and just to hear the hunger that he has, but maybe just some of the education that they need to carry their church forward. So that was really just a really neat thing for us. It's not necessarily like you say the door-to-door evangelism type things, but it is absolutely maybe taking some of the knowledge we have or some of the things that have worked for us or whatever, and encouraging them in that way, doing some very practical things. Electric work and things like that. And so it's a really neat trip in that way. And of course, like you say, the community there is special, and the town is awesome and really pretty. And so we got to enjoy that. And of course, we had an incredible planner. Matt took care of us and let us see some neat things, things I'd never seen before, Big Ben and some of those other things, Westminster. And of course, you pointed out to me, like, hey, man, Charles Darwin's buried. He's buried right there, man.
Yeah.
And so that was some of the neatest things that I've gotten to experience in my life. And, and so I think overall, just a neat thing to, and like we talked about for anybody interested in going, on a trip like this, it's not one that's difficult to go on, because there's not a language barrier, but there's some very practical ministry things that you get to do, and also get to experience the culture and see some things and have a piece of fish that's the size of a whale, and so but anyway, it's just really neat time.
Yeah.
Well, one of the things that I really enjoyed this year, because I got to go last year.
That's right.
So I think when we went the first time about a year ago, there were probably about 45 members there. But before we left, we went to church with them one day, and they had us stand up in front of the church, and they asked us questions about our culture and what we did and what we liked and that sort of thing. One of the things that they specifically asked us was, will you pray for us? Will your church continue to pray for us when you leave here? And we said, absolutely, and which we have continued to do throughout this year. And so it was really cool talking to some of them this year. Now that they've got more people, they had probably about maybe 60, but they had some, kind of younger ones there. And some of them saying, we truly believe y'all coming and y'all praying for us and y'all encouraging us was one of the things that has truly helped us grow.
Yeah.
So it's kind of, an affirmation. You're doing what God wants you to do to help grow his kingdom.
That's right.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. And I think that's the aspect of mission work that we have to do a better job at grasping, is this idea that, again, it's it's not a feel good thing for us just to go do something, or try to check a box or anything like that. We are partnering in ministry with brothers and sisters across the world. And we have, I like to kind of think about, when you read the New Testament and you see all the stuff, Paul and his journeys, all those kinds of things, like, and the reach they had in this new world, what would that look like in today's world with the access they would have to air travel, language, translation? I mean, all those kinds of things are just there at our fingertips. And I think we have to, kind of recognize that and, be aware of that, and, I can just think how great of an opportunity we have to do those things. And again, it's to partner, right? And just like you said, by praying for one another, it's great, because Anthony, who is our contact there, and one of the elders at this church that we partner with, he and I will do a Zoom call once a month to talk to each other, pray for each other, talk about what's going well in our churches, struggles we're facing, and all those kinds of things, that we're able to just fellowship and have that time together, which is a tremendous opportunity. And, into your mention, going and developing friendships with Ben and Rebecca, who, invited you into their home to stay, you have this lasting, impact, right? And while we're going and, perhaps taking a team to Syston, we're going there to help encourage, support, provide physical labor if that's what they need, provide, whatever, because essentially we're there to help them and equip them whatever way they need us for that short term. So now they have a whole nother year, or, their ministry continues onward. And so I think that's, all that's really good. So if someone, we're kind of thinking, we're going to circle back at the end and kind of talk about a potential trip taking, a group to this specific region and Syston and things like that. But before we get there, I want to kind of talk through, like, if someone were to approach you, kind of ask you some questions, maybe they're thinking about going on a mission trip, maybe specifically an international trip. What are some things that you would tell them? Maybe some things that you have learned along this journey that you realize you were either ill prepared for, or something you did to get prepared and it really helped you, or other experiences that you've learned over multiple trips, whatever that might be. What are some things that if someone's going to say, hey, I'm thinking about this, what advice would you give me?
It kind of depends on where you're going, I guess. Like, one of my absolute favorite trips was when we went to Israel, and we went to work with Jews for Jesus. Of course, we could not say that's what we were doing when we were over there. We couldn't do that. I thought I was prepared to go. Mark Brazier was, of course, leading us, and he is so good about preparing you for going. And I really thought I was prepared for that, and I was nowhere close. I wasn't expecting the culture as much, and seeing so many of the Islamic people. And I mean, they're literally everywhere. And there are a lot of different, sects of them that do different things. But just the way they talked, I mean, literally the men and the women, the way the men talked to the women a lot, or being separate. When we went to the Western Wall, the women had to be on one side, the men had to be on the other side. And also just walking around the town, and, the Army's everywhere. They're have their rifles. They're literally everywhere. Yeah. And I was not prepared for that.
Sure. Yep.
Yeah, well, I think, again, Pastor Matt, you did an incredible job of making sure that we kind of knew what to expect. And like you said, with this trip being not so difficult to kind of go into, there were some things that I might not tell someone just because it's kind of fun to learn on your own. But, for instance, what was it? Knowing Fahrenheit and Celsius, because the setting the temperature for the hotel room was a good time. Had to figure that out. Also, the lights wouldn't come on when I walked in there because you have to insert a little card into a little box on the side of the wall. Stuff like that is kind of, that's fun. That's some of the really fun things about going into a culture and learning things. But also, one of the things that that I tried to think through, and as words or common phrases and things that they would use or they wouldn't use. And so one of the things that they a lot of the older men for sure picked on me about a little bit was saying yes sir and no sir, because it's just not something they do, and they don't say Mr. Jeremy or whatever. Ben and Rebecca's boys, it was just Jeremy, which might seem to us maybe a little rude or whatever, which of course is not. I mean, but for them, they thought like, what's wrong with this guy? Why is he saying yes sir? And as much as I tried to break the habit, I couldn't do it, and so but that's kind of neat. But as far as I think. Thinking about an 8-hour or so flight, don't get a window seat. That was a poor choice. And so, because I'm not, you might be the kind of person that's like, hey, will you kind of move so I can get out? I'm not the kind of guy that's going to aggravate you or bother you at all. And so I'm just sitting over there like my knees are hurting, I'm maybe thinking about another Aleve or something, whatever. And so thinking about things like that is pretty fun to experience that. I think, and we talked a little bit about how as Americans we tend to be louder or take up more space or whatever, and so I got to see that kind of firsthand, even on the tube, right, the travel system underground there, where we would be talking, and then it was almost like other people on the tube there or on the train would talk lower because we were talking louder. It seemed like anyway, and so that's kind of neat. So I think for this trip in particular, just really neat to see some of the different things like turning the on and off switch for outlets and things like that, and have knowing that there's a different plug-in of what is it called, an outlet, that kind of stuff. So,
well, and the time difference.
That's right. That's right.
That was a big difference when you want to, call home or something. It's like, okay, it's lunchtime here and it's dinner time. They're fixing to go to bed. So that made a big difference too. But I learned on the airplane, I get aisle seats. That's it. It's like, that's the only way I can do it.
Yeah. So, because I'm a window guy, I'm good because, it also depends on the flight. Sometimes I'm aisle guy. But if it's depending on if I'm trying to sleep, because I've gotten to where I can kind of know when I need to sleep versus when I want to be awake, different time zone changes and all that sort of stuff. If it's when I need to sleep, I'm a window guy because then I settle in for the long nap. I can kind of lean against the window. I'm not going to have to worry about getting up or out because my goal is to sleep this whole time. If I know it's an awake flight, then I want an aisle seat so I can get up, I can walk the aisles, move, get the blood flowing, all those kinds of things. So it's, that's fun. I think if, kind of along those same lines, kind of talking through, taking a group to Syston, and as we sit here, that would be our intent next year. And so, what are some things as far as ministry minded, mindset? Like if you were to, someone's listening here and they're contemplating getting involved in some type of ministry or going out of the country for the first time or going to Syston to serve this local church. What are some things you would say, like after now having been there, like? Why should someone go partner with this church in Syston? What is it about this group of people, this church? Why should I go here? Or what's the point? Why do you need me? Is kind of how would you answer that question?
I would say, having been there and knowing those people, they absolutely need it. I mean, they were very just point blank tell you that. Because it is a small community, there's not a lot of outside, for them to go to the coast or something was like 3 hours away, and it's like, oh, that's we don't go there, that's too far away. Their sense of distance and hours is just totally different. They're in this little small area, and I think because they're in this small area, and I guess repeating myself, but they're kind of isolated, so they don't see a lot of other people. They don't have a lot of other interaction with them. So you go with the intent of really just loving on those people and talking to them, but listening to them, listen to what they have to say. And I guess that's one of the main things is, like I say, I finally learned to do the talking and that sort of thing. But truly listening to them is just an awesome thing to be able to do.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think just kind of at the start, for anyone that has never gone somewhere internationally, kind of from the start, even in preparation to fly for a while, or to wait in an airport for a while, those kind of things. I think it's a great introductory thing and of course I think in terms of student ministry or anyone that's never traveled internationally, there's a whole process there, right? So getting a passport and doing all that kind of stuff, thinking about if you're going to carry cash, you're going to have to get that changed and all of that. So I think from a practical standpoint, it's a very good kind of just I would say easy. We can use that easy. Yeah. Conversation thing. You can, and the food's not so different that you can't find something to eat. You may laugh at baked beans at every meal or whatever for breakfast in particular, but that's right. So I think in that regard, I would say anyone that would be interested in international travel, this is an incredible opportunity. But also, you step off you get out of our large SUV that we rented, right? And you step out there and instantly kind of just fall in love with the people for their kindness and who they are, and you get to kind of see. When, in terms of the American church, when all the lights go away and when all the fancy stuff goes away, you're left with the gospel and good people, and I think that's what you see in Syston is a hunger for the gospel and good people that want to carry the gospel and just need some help doing that. And so I think anybody that would be interested in, as the Apostle Paul said, spurring one another along for the sake of the gospel, I think that's a great spot for them. And I think there's some other practical ways to get plugged in there and to help. And I know we are talking through a few things as potential, but I think for someone that is wanting to get to know a culture and to get to know a people and to really fall in love with a genuine-hearted people that genuinely just want to carry the gospel to Syston and to Leicester and to England, I think it's just a great opportunity for that.
Yeah, that's good.
And one of the things that we had talked about with Anthony was getting involved with a school. And there's an elementary school there close by. And of course, their political whatever is kind of different, so that they have to really watch what they do. But he did tell us that while you really can't discuss religion in school, you can do it as a history lesson. And they have the history there. I mean, we're walking around this town and seeing churches that were built in the 1500s, which to me was just incredible. And the cemeteries, the people that had been there for just hundreds of years. But getting to work with the school children is something that I'm really hoping we get to do when we go back, which would be awesome. If we could get some of they would love our kids and our kids would love them. But I would love to go back and actually just spend some more time around kids, because so far we've pretty much dealt with adults, which has been wonderful. But I'd love for that to branch out with some kids.
Sure. Yeah, and I think that has always been our hope and our prayer as we've partnered with a local church. Anytime I particularly am leading a team on call it a mission trip, wherever it is, my prayer in that has always been, God, send me where we are needed, right? I don't want to be a burden. I don't want to be a statistic. I don't want to be anything other than a willing servant where you can use us. And I found that, at this point with Syston and, several places I've mentioned before, I like the idea of partnership. I like the idea of understanding they are a church that's planted in this specific place where God is using them in a community of 50, 60,000 people, in a community that has maybe 3 evangelical churches. And so a tremendous opportunity, tremendous potential to reach a group of people that just need help, in doing so. And we're there to, as you said, spur one another along and, to do that. And so that's kind of been my prayer. And I think that is kind of our calling, specifically to Syston, is it gives us an opportunity to enter into a place that culturally is kind of a low threshold as far as cultural changes. It's still a very different culture.
For sure.
But it's kind of like an easy on-ramp. but there's tremendous opportunity, tremendous potential, partnering with the schools, reaching out in the community, all those kinds of things. But most importantly, setting a foundation and encouragement for this, local body of believers who they're just doing everything they can to keep pressing on with the gospel, and we can kind of come alongside and help support them in that way.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of, the idea, and, as we, the theme of this podcast is kind of better things ahead. I've had the opportunity to now visit Syston 3 or 4 times, and, each one of those times has been a blessing. Some of my fondest memories are times whenever myself and Anthony, we'll go on a prayer walk and kind of pray for the community that we're walking through, and, we've sat down on a park bench and just sit there and talk and pray for each other and just kind of, encourage each other. That's not building a well. That's not, going door to door evangelism, but it's ministry and it's a missions opportunity that we can be involved in. And so, hopefully as we kind of listen to this and we kind of think of better things ahead, is there's tremendous opportunity, tremendous potential for future trips. And, we'd love the idea to partner with our church and take more members over there. And so, as I mentioned before, I appreciate you guys coming on to kind of talk about that. I know within the context here at Ridgecrest, our church members are welcome, and encouraged to stop you guys in the hallway and interact and just say, hey, tell me more about this. I think I might go, and, ask them questions. As you're listening, maybe you're not connected to Ridgecrest and, you would have a question. Put it down in the comments. We'd love to answer any questions specifically about Syston and this community that we've partnered with. There'd be tremendous opportunity, and also, maybe you partnered with or you've done mission work or ministry in other places around the world. Leave that in the comments. We'd love to know where our reach is and kind of where the gospel's going all across the world, because that's what we're called to do. And, as we kind of do that together, we can support one another, we can pray for one another, build community with one another in all these different ways that we use our skills, use our gifts to serve locally, nationally, and internationally. So as always, we appreciate you listening, and there are better things ahead.
Thanks for joining us on Better Things Ahead. Follow the show on Spotify and Apple Podcast, and subscribe to our YouTube channel for the video of our podcast. Until next time, keep moving forward, because there are always better things ahead.